Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth session of FCS at Home, Sizzling Summer, our FCS Sizzling Summer series. Today, I'm excited to have presenting for us Dr. Amy Kostelic and Dr. Alex Elswick, who will be sharing our topic, Operation Kentucky Sunshine. So I'm going to turn it over now to Amy.
Great. Good morning, everybody. I am actually talking to you from Door County, Wisconsin. I don't know if people have heard of this place. It's up north of Green Bay, but that's why I've got, as Mindy has mentioned, fir trees in my background. It was the best background I could get. So hopefully video and sound is going to be okay. And I'm really pleased to be talking to you from up here. I am the Aging and Adult Specialist for FCS Extension, and I'm really pleased to be able to be co-presenting today with Alex Elswick. And Alex, I'll let you take it over and give the intro to our little talk today.
Thank you, Amy. My name is Alex Elswick. I'm the Specialist for Substance Use Prevention and Recovery. And I think we have something really exciting in store today. First of all, the title, hashtag Operation Kentucky Sunshine, we kicked around some different ideas. I think that was Mindy's idea, if I remember correctly, but I think it's really cool. And it's kind of a call to arms to kindness, to something that we desperately need right now at a time when we're all socially disconnected and maybe not getting our social needs met. And so we're going to talk a little bit about loneliness, a little bit about happiness, the remedy, and a little bit about kindness.
Great. Well, July 11th is National Cheer Up the Lonely Day. And truthfully, I didn't know this day had existed. I had never heard of it before. But as we were also brainstorming and coming up with our Sizzling Summer series, we were looking at different national observances and saw that this was one of them. And just to give you a little bit of history on the date, it's not a lot. There's not a lot of information out there other than someone had a really kind heart. And that was a gentleman by the name of Francis Pesek. And he was from Detroit, Michigan, and he just observed the loneliness and the amount of loneliness that was going on in nursing homes in the Detroit area. And he just said there's got to be a way, again, with a creative heart and a kind soul, just to help combat that. And some of you may have heard me say before, there's a fairly well-known geriatrician by the name of Bill Thomas, and he always said that boredom, helplessness, and loneliness are 3 plagues of long-term care. So certainly this Mr. Francis Pesek recognized that as well, and really moved to make a day to say, if you can't do this every day, then at least do this on July 11th, and that happened to be his birthday. And he thought that would be a way that he could promote kindness, across the nation, at least for one day a year. And so we really thought we would pick up on that, especially given our time in pandemic right now. And so I think this is a little bit tricky because as we open back up, we're seeing the numbers surge. But what I think people sometimes forget is that people who are at risk still of COVID-19, so those are the folks with chronic conditions, those are older adults, they're still at risk for the virus until we have a vaccination. And so there are a lot of people who were lonely or at risk of being lonely prior to the pandemic, but as a result of the pandemic, we still have a lot of folks out there that we've got to think about and really help protect, or look for ways that we can help cheer them up. And so we thought that celebrating National Cheer Up the Lonely Day and Operation Kentucky Sunshine, our version of National Cheer Up the Lonely Day, was one way to do that. And so that's what we're going to talk about for a bit today. We're going to talk about some of the risk factors to loneliness and what causes it and why it's bad for us and what we can do to help cheer up somebody's day. You want to flip? There we go. So we all feel lonely from time to time, and I think that's important to point out that this isn't, just doesn't plague certain people. We all have moments. It's very fluid. It fluctuates. We can fluctuate in and out of loneliness, and that's very common. However, loneliness is something that we don't necessarily have an agreed upon definition of. We know that it's a subjective feeling. We know that it causes severe suffering for people from time to time. It's caused by being disconnected from other people. Some explanations talk about it where there's a gap or a mismatch between the number of quality of social relationships and connections that we have and those that we would like to have. We can also look at loneliness in regards to social and emotional scales. So you've got social loneliness when something is missing or you're missing this wider social network. And emotional loneliness can be caused when you're missing a feeling of an intimate relationship. But whatever the definition you want to use, in general, we know that it is an unwelcome, it's painful, and it's an unpleasant feeling. And loneliness is also different than social isolation. And I think we've got a bullet on that coming up. Social isolation is much more objective. That's a count. That's not being around other people or not having close connections. So when we look at COVID-19, for example, right now, we've got a lot of people in that category where they're socially isolated. And so that makes me come up with this last bullet to say that you can, not only does loneliness affect, all ages, anywhere, anyone, but you can be alone and not feel lonely, but you can also be around people and suffer from loneliness. So I want to make sure that we point that out. And I also want to reinforce too, that we're not just talking about loneliness because of COVID-19. I said that on the previous slide. I mean, loneliness has been something that experts have worried about, especially in the US, long before COVID-19 occurred. There are some 60% of Americans who report feeling some degree of loneliness. And again, this is pre-COVID-19. So that number came from a 2019 study. Surprisingly to me, was the highest number of people reporting feelings of loneliness are actually the millennials. So 71% of millennials reported having some degree of feeling lonely. Now, in the pandemic, our older adults who have felt lonely has increased to about 70% as well. And that's a number that's gone up as a result of COVID-19. And so again, that can be a combination of, you've got socially isolated people, who are now suffering from loneliness because of not having that interpersonal communication and connection, contact with people. So that hopefully just gives us a little bit of background in ways in which we want to think about loneliness, and how really vulnerable people can be from it. So like so many things that are bad for us, loneliness is also bad for both our mental and our physical health. We know that loneliness is associated with heart disease. There's about a 29% increase of risk of having heart disease if you suffer from chronic loneliness, a 32% increase with stroke. It can cause high blood pressure, compromised immune systems, which is something we don't want, especially during a pandemic. It can cause anxiety. It can cause dementia. Some reports show that it has a 50% increase of risk of dementia, again, with chronic loneliness. So this, I said before, loneliness can be fluid or fluctuate. You can go in and out of loneliness, but we're talking about when you've got chronic loneliness over time. It can cause depression and even premature death. And premature death is death before the age of 75. Loneliness can increase risk for substance abuse and self-harm. It can contribute to the greater risk for contracting COVID-19. Again, that's because the immune system and COVID-19 and mental health are related. It decreases your ability to recover from illness. It can cause increased risk of elder abuse, financial scams, causes problems with your personal routine, having a sense of purpose. It does a lot of bad things to us that we may not think about or associate with loneliness. But again, like other things that are bad for our health, so is loneliness. I think we can flip, Mindy.
So Amy's documented a number of the physical health consequences of loneliness, but there are almost certainly also mental health consequences and consequences for the brain. And as a person who studies substance use and mental health, it's particularly interesting to me to look at how social isolation impacts the brain. And as it turns out, what social isolation does is increase cortisol, which is a neurochemical in our brain that's been called mental health enemy number one, because it's your stress response. It's basically your fight or flight response. And when it was first identified and first being discussed, it was sort of categorized into two different kinds of stress. There was one called eustress, which is considered adaptive. So you can think about, if you're driving down the road and the car in front of you slams on its brakes and you have to slam on yours, it's a good thing to have a fight or flight response. It's going to be helpful to have a rush of cortisol to protect you. But when you're going about your daily life, if your cortisol levels are too high, you don't want to be experiencing fight or flight responses to emails and phone calls and the like. And the reason is because cortisol is associated with increased likelihood of all sorts of mental disorder, everything from anxiety and depression to bipolar disorder to schizophrenia to substance use disorder. And one study, a pretty recent study from 2013, compared cortisol levels in widows to married persons and found that recent widows had a 36% higher cortisol levels than their married counterparts. And that was due entirely to the experience of being alone. And so why is that? It's really interesting to me to note that human beings need social interaction. And in fact, social interactions impact our brains the same way that drugs do, if you can believe that. The same way that heroin and cocaine releases dopamine in our limbic system, so too do social interactions release dopamine in our limbic systems. And the reason for that, if you think about it, centuries, millennia ago, when we were like hunters and gatherers, we needed to band together in order to survive. It was sort of adaptive for our survival to work together and to not try to be a lone wolf, but rather to get into the middle of the pack and be protected. So we have this evolutionary cue to want to be around people and be connected. And when we don't have that, we suffer as a result.
Alex, that's so true. I mean, it really, in simple terms, social connection is literally a basic human need. We are wired to love. We're wired to be loved and to be accepted and to be valued and to connect to others and to definitely have a feeling and a sense of belonging and to feel like we belong. It's funny because we've talked about this before in different meetings and different seminars, but we know that healthcare providers, they want us to eat healthy and to get enough exercise and sleep and manage our weight, manage our stress, make sure that we're maintaining a positive attitude, stay away from smoking and drinking too much and all those things. And I think we're starting to hear more and more, even in on the Today Show or on general news, that doctors need to start prescribing social connections and how important that is. And so we know that, I went over some of the negative things that loneliness can cause over time, but we also know that having that enhanced social, emotional, and physical connection to people does things like this that we've got listed on this slide. So we know that it strengthens the immunity system. We know that it can lower rates of anxiety and depression, promote happiness, and enhances self-esteem. I mean, all these things that can improve our work production. It influences cooperation and empathy, which is also an important note, I think, because when we have an increased sense of cooperation, empathy, trust, that helps create deeper connections with people. So that's kind of a cyclical, way that works there. It also boosts brain vitality. And as Alex just talked about that as well, on the aging side of that, that's important to us because we really look at that as a decreasing risk factor for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And then also, if you look at it from the aging perspective over time, social connection can contribute to longevity, maybe up to 50% or so.
Yeah, I like the way you frame that as social interaction being similar to like nutrition or exercise, because probably that same list of benefits you would find as benefits of exercise or nutrition all the same, just things we need. So if you all have been on some of the webinars before, you may have heard me talk about this book, The How of Happiness. I teach this book in multiple classes at University of Kentucky, and I love it. Dr. Lubomirski is considered the authority on happiness research. She's the happiness expert in the world. And one of the most significant findings from all of her research is that when you look at what dictates how happy we are, about half of it is genetic, is sort of what gets passed down from our parents. About 10% is life circumstance, so it's your marital status, your income level, things of that nature. But 40%, very substantive amount, is intentional activity. In other words, it's 40% of your happiness is within your control. And so even at a time when we may be socially disconnected, even at a time when we may not be able to experience all the benefits of connectivity, there are things we can do to spread kindness and to choose happiness. And so I figured I would share with you just a couple that Dr. Lubomirski offers. This is her prescription for happiness. And the first that I talk about everywhere I go all the time is mindfulness and meditation. And that's because it has in the literature such a long and robust list of benefits. And I'll mention three that I think are particularly important. And the first is, I'm a person with an anxiety disorder. And so I know the role that my amygdala plays as the fear center in my brain. I have an amygdala that's slightly overactive. So I perceive fear a little too often, even in social situations. what meditation does, even just 15 to 20 minutes of meditation a day, physically shrinks the size of your amygdala. We can actually measure this in your brain. Physically makes your fear center smaller, makes you a less fearful person. As a consequence of shrinking your amygdala, it also reduces cortisol levels. And we talked about how cortisol is the enemy of your mental health. So obviously that's something we want to do. And then lastly, it helps to create more gray matter in parts of our brain that are associated with our ability to be resilient and to deal with discomfort. So it actually makes us better at sitting with discomfort and fighting through and being persistent. So that's strategy number one. You can explore a great many ways to engage in mindfulness. The second one that I would offer is gratitude. And I just saw on social media not long ago, someone say, gratitude takes what you have and makes it enough. And I think that's so apropos. I like the way that that's said. And Dr. Lubomirski talks about how gratitude is important because it helps us stave off one of the great enemies of happiness. And that's this thing called hedonic adaptation. And sometimes it's also called the hedonic treadmill. And it basically is the phenomenon of human beings taking things for granted, right? So if I get a raise, I may be temporarily happy, but in time, I'll become adjusted to it. I take it for granted. It doesn't bring me as much happiness anymore. And so when we practice gratitude, we're being intentional about sort of savoring the value of the things that we have, which I think is always important. I won't extol the benefits of exercise too much. That's sort of the realm of our physical health specialist, Natalie Jones. But I would say that there's a good link to all forms of mental health recovery, from anxiety, depression, substance use, etc. And then lastly, most appropriate to our week, is practicing kindness. And I'll be completely honest with all of you. Had I been giving this webinar 5 years ago, I, in my immaturity, probably would have rolled my eyes at the notion of practicing kindness, because I sort of thought of kindness as something immutable. Either you have it or you don't, either you're kind or you're not. And what I learned in part from Dr. Lubomirski's book is that kindness really is a practice, just like exercise and gratitude, and something that we have to be intentional about. And so I shared with Amy a little while ago that in order to practice what I preach, I decided to write some letters of gratitude to important people in my life. And one of the things that I learned from doing that, I hope that it improved their day, but it certainly improved my level of happiness.
I'm going to interrupt here for a second too, Alex. I know you've got more to talk about on the next slide, but I was reminded that when during the podcast at the beginning on empathy, David talked about books and how we can read different books to kids. And there's this great book about a zookeeper, and he goes and takes care of all of his animals. Every day he takes care of his animals. And then one day he gets sick and he can't take care of the animals. And so the animals all, again, this is a children's book, but they escape from the zoo, and they go to the zookeeper's house to take care of him because he was homesick in bed. And it is such, I read it in my human development class, and it is such a touching story of kindness and empathy. And you're right. I think there are certain life stages that we're in where you might think, how can kindness have health benefits? But it really can. And just to have that sparkle of joy or kindness, or to know someone's done that for you, you know, not only helps you as the recipient, but it also generates these feelings of good internally too for doing it.
So I think some people may be concerned that maybe people who are introverts may be at a disadvantage in not getting the social connection that they need, but the research doesn't necessarily say that. So Amy already talked about how you can think of loneliness as a disparity between the amount of connection you have and the amount of connection you want, which is a good way of thinking of it, I think. But I'm an introverted person. I'm a person who gets my energy from being alone. But the good news is the research tells us that what's most important is not quantity of relationships. We don't have to be social butterflies. We don't have to be friends with everyone, but quality. So most important that we have significant quality relationships with friends and family, even if they're few. And then secondly, Amy mentioned that millennials are suffering loneliness perhaps more than any other generation. And part of that researchers are attributing to the rise of social media and sort of the disconnection that comes with that form of connectivity. But I would say this as something optimistic. There is research that certainly suggests that connecting through Zoom or through Facebook or even through a text message, as long as it's felt as connection, can be experienced the same way as being physically present. So I would still encourage people to use technology and leverage that to our advantage to get the benefits of social connection.
We can flip, Mindy. So hold on a second. We're at I think on a different deck of slides than what I had. So give me 1 second. Okay. So I was on a webinar yesterday, and it was by a gal from Bluegrass Navigators, and she was really good because she talked about social isolation and certainly loneliness, but looking at ways that we could address this for my particular audience. Again, it was older adults, but it was really applicable to anybody. And so part of what she said in that talk was, what are ways in which we can address social isolation, and again, social isolation / loneliness here in times of COVID-19 in particular. So one thing that she said is that we really need to assess the perception of support. And that goes back to, people can be alone and not feel lonely. And people can be with people and feel lonely. There was an article that I was reading actually about, she was a young adult, a young mom actually with young kids. And she said, I never really knew what loneliness was. And I thought, how in the world, why am I feeling strange? Why do I have these odd feelings? Why do I not feel whole? Because I've got my kids, my husband, we've got our health. We're really lucky, but I am so isolated here. And it was a good perspective of a young person struggling, and a young person struggling even though she was surrounded with people. And she struggled with that as well because she thought, my grandmother is with nobody and she's doing okay, and here I am lucky to be isolated with my family, and I'm miserable. I am absolutely miserable. So when we did that Menti.com at the beginning and asked you who in your community are isolated, you may want to go in and switch your answers to, or update answers, because we really, I think that the knee-jerk reaction is it's my grandma, it's the people who are isolated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be younger people. And so we really want to identify who, how do we assess the perceptions of support that people need, and who are those people who need support, because it may not be, that knee-jerk reaction person that comes into your head. It may be somebody else, or it may be, my grandma's on that list, when it really may not be your grandma. Your grandma might be fine. I can use my mom as an example. She's almost 76. She's been in Minnesota during all of this, all by herself. We have no family up there. And, right now she's kind of getting to a point where she's like, okay, I'm tired of this. But she said, for me, a big part of this has been having a sense of purpose. I've been working on this family diary. I have a reason to get out of bed every day. So I'm not one of those people who you need to worry about, quite yet. So again, it's assessing what are people's needs and what are people, how are people feeling? And so this gal yesterday talked a lot about that. And so then you also have to access, what do people have? Do they have access to phones and video communication? Like Alex was just saying, right now, we're really fortunate that we've got all this video conferencing and video technology, because that's one way that people are able to connect. But it doesn't really work if people don't have phones and they don't have access to it, or don't know how to use it, or they've got vision impairment or hearing impairment, and that can be, problematic. Are there ways in which we can expand telehealth? And that's really expanding with the mental health support and just physical support too. And just how can we do more with the weekly social group interventions? She also talked a lot about how can we do more assessment for loneliness. And so there are all these different measurement tools that can be used. There's actually an entire campaign. I mean, this was a national observance, right? But there are also campaigns, literal campaigns to end loneliness. One, for example, it's called www.campaigntoendloneliness.org. They have a ton of resources on there, including little assessments that you or I could to give to people. So one, for example, it's a measurement tool, really simple, and it will just ask somebody, and it uses very positive language, and it will ask people, are you content with friendships and relationships? Do you have people you feel comfortable asking for help at any time? Are your relationships satisfying as you would want them to be? And then they rank that on a Likert scale. So from strongly disagree to I don't know, that's a scale. It gets converted to a scale of 1 to 12, and it kind of helps people identify the least lonely to the most lonely. And again, that then can help people go back and assess, well, Marie at 22 is actually struggling more than we realized, or grandma at 88 is kind of doing well, she's happy to have this time, sort of thing. So my point in talking about that is there are different ways that we can identify loneliness that we may not have thought about. And so that brings us to this interactive slide. Oh, let's go back one, Mindy. Sorry about that. can we pull that word bubble back up? So we wanted to ask you, in your communities, who is lonely or at risk of being lonely in your community right now? Because we thought that might just help people brainstorm and think about people who may be affected by this and who then we can help spread joy to, like Alex and I have been talking about. You know, who are the people that we need to cheer up or just, you know, do something for? So I don't know, Mindy, are we able to get that word bubble back up?
I'm working on it. It's
Okay.
Having
Just pop it in if it works, and we'll keep going. But again, you know, and maybe people can write it in the chat box too if you've got someone besides older adults or people who are just stuck at home. And I think it's important to note too that there are 37.5 million people in the United States who live alone. That's 28% of our U.S. households are people living alone. And so we've got to think about that too, because that means there are a high risk or a high number of people right now who have had little social interaction with people. And that's scary because that potentially could mean that they're not talking to people, telling people how they feel, their feelings, their frustrations, their fears, their worries, and so forth. And so, you know, those are the kinds of people we want to keep in mind as well. So if we flip forward, this is sort of, you know, why we thought Operation Kentucky Sunshine was so important, because this is a way that we, through FCS Extension, can promote spreading joy and give you some ideas on ways in which you can spread joy. If you just think, I don't know, what should I do? We know that joy improves people's ability to connect with others. We know that, again, so this is being the person who's providing, you know, joy or giving that kindness like Alex talked about. So we know that just by doing acts of kindness, it can enhance overall health, well-being, life quality. It boosts your energy. It contributes to your brain vitality, as we already talked about. It makes people more optimistic. It can help you feel more happy internally. It can influence your own daily life satisfaction. It provides you with your own personal sense of purpose, and just increases your own joy by doing something good to someone else. And so it doesn't matter who you are or what your situation is, anybody can spread joy. As Mr. Pesic said, the man who created this National Day of the Lonely, you know, it just takes creativity. It takes a good heart to be able to do something good for somebody else. So what we came up with Operation Kentucky Sunshine, and hopefully people in your communities have been working on this throughout the week, is we came up with a little schedule. We love our calendars in FCS Extension during this this pandemic. And so our schedule for this week kind of looked like this, that we were hoping that on Monday people were, you know, it doesn't have to follow this order. This was just something we thought, you know, ideas that we could give to people, you know, but can you provide lawn care, mow it on Mondays, take and bake Tuesdays, Word It Up Wednesday. Today was Transform Thursday. You know, do something in your neighborhood, you know, make a chalk mural. Some of those chalk murals have been amazing if you've been looking at the news. Tomorrow, we really want to encourage you and for you to encourage folks in your community to share those photos and things they've done on the internet, on Facebook, through the hashtag Operation Kentucky Sunshine. And then on Saturday, we want you to take care of yourself. And so Alex is going to talk about that in a second. But before he does, I just want to say too that these were just some ideas for this week. Mindy, if you flip one slide forward, we also just want to remind you that staying physically distant but socially connected is possible, and that we still have to maintain that during this time. And so think about all the ways that we've talked about before. Think about stuff you've heard on the TV and things you've read. You know, I think a lot of it is, again, being creative, making sure that you're connecting with people and giving them the emotional support that they may need, the tangible support, that's the mailing the packages and things like that. But there's also network support. How do we help people feel like they belong? And there's even esteem support that you get for yourself by doing good things, but also that you're giving to other people. These letters that Alex wrote, and we've got a video to show you at the end too, that makes people feel so good to know that someone was thinking about them, and that can really create a boost in someone else as well. So there's lots of things that people can do to bring joy. But again, in doing this, you also have to take care of yourself.
You know, one of the things I appreciate about that list is that's low-hanging fruit. None of those things are terribly difficult. None of those things are going to cost you a lot of time or a lot of money. And how often have Have you, I know I certainly have, been driving down the road and thought about something nice I want to do for someone, and I don't ever actually do it? And people don't judge me by my motives, they judge me by my actions. And so I think just taking the initiative and just being proactive about doing those things is important. But before you go out to do that good work, before you go out to do the work of taking care of other people, step one, the presumptive step one, is taking care of yourself. So you've probably heard the analogy of you can't pour from an empty cup. I prefer the analogy of when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant is going over the safety precautions and the procedures, and she says, in the event of an emergency, put on your oxygen mask first before you put on your child's oxygen mask. And the reason for that is because unless you take care of yourself, unless you have oxygen, you'll be no good to anyone else, in the same way that your pitcher will be empty and you can't pour from an empty pitcher. And again, self-care is one of those things that I think some time ago I might have scoffed out a little bit, but it's one of those things that's so fundamental that everything seems so cliche. So when we say you got to take care of your body, you got to take care of your mind, you got to take care of your soul, you got to get plenty of sleep, they're all maybe pretty obvious, but if we take a good hard look, there are probably holes in all of our programs in terms of things that we're not doing. So for instance, for many of us, we would say, well, sure, I don't use drugs, so that's part of my self-care. But are you using caffeine, drinking Coke or coffee late in the day? That could be adversely affecting your weight, your sleep, your mental health. When was the last time that you dedicated 30 minutes to just stillness? Just dedicated time to just being, to just existing, and not trying to do much of anything else. I think spending time in nature has been something that I have taken advantage of during, I think in many ways I've been fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of during the pandemic. I've gone hiking, which isn't something that I necessarily would have done before. I've taken lots of walks. I took a walk this morning in the sunshine. I just think it's a good way to get some good feelings going. And then the thing that I love the most is this slide finishes with the suggestion, choose to be happy, which a lot of us would say either I'm happy or I'm not, but Dr. Lubomirski would admonish us and say very clearly, you can choose to be happy if you choose to proactively engage in those activities that bring you happiness. And so I would just encourage you to do those things, to take care of yourself, and then to go out and do that good for other people.
So I'm sorry about that, you guys. A huge storm just blew up out of nowhere. And so I had to make a quick move, and I didn't realize I didn't mute myself as I was trying to get inside. I'm sorry, Alex.
No, you're great.
It just came out of nowhere. So we're going to try, I think we should be good to get this video up. We're just going to show a clip of it, but I think this really demonstrates how reciprocal spreading joy can be. And so Mindy, if you could get that rolling for us, that would be great. We'll show about 2 minutes of this video.
Keep talking for a minute. I'm struggling with the video. It's not going to work again.
Oh, okay, and if it doesn't, it's not that big of a deal. So I can kind of set it up. This is a woman who's actually from Scotland, and she and her husband, she'll say how old she is, and I can't quite remember. I think she's in her 80s. But she and her husband have been having to isolate from their family because of the pandemic and trying to stay healthy. And she basically just says, this stinks. We're not used to this. We miss the conversations. We miss being with people. We miss our families. And I know Alex and I talked about this in our podcast, that even though we're so fortunate to have video conferencing and opportunities like this, for a lot of people and over extended periods of time, it's really not enough. And so people are starting to struggle, even if we can do Zooms, and even though Zooms are better than nothing, people really are starting to struggle. So she has a granddaughter, a young adult, she's a young adult, and the granddaughter recognized the struggle and thought, what can I do to, just something that I can do to help my grandmother who's visibly struggling. And so she reached out to people she knew, whether they were good friends and family or acquaintances, people she'd went to school with, and said, could you please write a note to my granny? And the reason that I really liked this particular video, and we've heard that, we've Girl Scout troops have shared, written letters and all these things, and that's wonderful. But what I really like about this video that we're about to see is the detail that's in these letters and the things that people shared to Granny Janet and how meaningful that was to her. So here, it looks like we're going to be able to get it to roll.
I'm missing the talk, and so I was feeling a bit down. One day, the post came and put loads of letters through my door. I suddenly got a new lease of life. I'll treasure it. My name is Janet. I'm 84 years old. I live in the Scottish Borders town of Innerleithen with my husband Pat, who is 87. Since we've confined to the house, I'm missing the talk and the blethers that I used to have with the people who come in to visit me. And so I was feeling a bit down. My granddaughter, Katie Barnett, had the great idea of asking her friends to write letters to me. One day, the post came and put loads of letters through my door, and I suddenly got a new lease of life. I thought you might like to hear what some of the contents are that have given me such pleasure. Hannah says, "Dear Janet, I hope this letter finds you well. I've just returned from Salzburg in Austria. I was doing a nursing placement there in the intensive care unit in January. It was an amazing experience, and I learnt so many new skills to take on board for when I qualify in September." And then she sends me all these pictures, places I have never been and know all about but will never be able to see. So now I'm seeing them. I think that's wonderful. This is from a lovely boy called Ian, who lived in Fraserburgh and was my oldest grandson's best friend. He said, "Dear Granny Janet, Katie mentioned you might be stuck in the house for a whole while and would enjoy a wee note. So here you go. Hopefully this virus passes soon and you get out and about again. From Ian." Wasn't that lovely? Wasn't it? I'll treasure it.
So the whole video is about 5 or so minutes long, and she reads a couple of other examples, but as you can see, and some of you have written in the comment box too, it's really touching. And I think the one where they sent the pictures was really impressive, because she even said, "These are places I know about, but I'll never get to go. And now I get to see these and experience it through other people." And I think that's really neat, because it was more than just, you know, "Dear Granny Janet, I heard you're lonely and the weather stinks," or, you know, or whatever. It was, these brought meaning to her. And the one the one she reads that's coming up talks about someone baked something, and that reminded her, triggered a memory for her of a cake, I think it was, that she baked. So again, you know, something as simple as writing a letter like that, you saw the joy that it brought to her, but also the memories that it triggered of complete strangers to this woman. But again, the meaning that was within, it's pretty remarkable. So we hope that kind of inspires you. Our last slide here, I think it's such an awesome quote. "To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world." And again, I think that really shows how kindness is a two-way street as well. And that we hope in this crazy time that we're still living in, especially, that you think about who is lonely and continues to be isolated in your communities and your families. And, you know, like Mr. Pesic said, at least take this 1 week or this one day to do something to help combat that loneliness for people that need it.
Well, thank you all so much. I guess I would leave you with one last push to be proactive about taking care of yourself. Somebody once told me that nobody can exercise for you, which makes me laugh. I think it's true. And nobody can do self-care for you. It's the self part pretty clearly implicates we got to do it ourselves. So go out there and take care of yourselves, and then let's go and spread joy. Let's be intentional about spreading happiness. Maybe write some letters to some people who are isolated and not getting the connection that they need right now.
Thank you to Alex and Amy for a great presentation. I was touched by much that both of them said, and I hope that you were as well. We are, of course, continuing this series for the next 3 weeks. And so next week we will have a presentation on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Central. And the topic is summer melt. We'll be talking about all of the things that can help us keep our cool during these hot summer days. So we hope that you'll join us. In the meantime, if you would like to take a survey about this session or any of the sessions that we have shared, excuse me, for the last 4 weeks, you can scan this QR code in your smartphone, or you can type the link that's at the bottom into your browser and take a survey about these sessions. It looks like there's a space after the R in summer, but there is not. So don't put a space between the R and the underscore there. We are giving prizes away for those who complete the survey and give us your contact information. And we are giving a prize away each week. So you are eligible to be in the drawing for every week that you participate. So make sure that you note all of the weeks that you participate. And finally, it's the same survey for each session. And you can click at the end and click all that you participated in, or you can go in each week and complete those surveys. That's all that we have for you today. If you have any questions, you are always welcome to put them in the comment section if you're watching on Facebook Live. And we will make sure to get those to Amy and Alex so that they can answer any questions that you have if you don't have them at the moment. Additionally, all of our videos are available on our YouTube channel, and you can find that channel by searching UKFCS EXT on YouTube, or by putting bit.ly / capital F, capital A, capital C, capital S _ learning _ channel with the L and the C capitalized. And we will, you can find all of our videos there. I think that wraps up everything that we have for you today, and we hope that you will join us again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Be happy.